Welcome back, everybody, to the sSEC Weekly Show. I'm your host, Ezeco, and I apologize for our absence. I've had a lot of work stuff going on, been working a lot of stuff, and this is going to be our first show since week 9. We're checking in with week 12. Quick note, this is not real SEC football. It's not real college football. This is simulated college football for the simulated Southeastern Conference. If you're interested, check out the description. Check out our website below. Uh, give us a look. One of the things I've been working on is college basketball, as many of you in the Discord might have seen. So the good news there is when football season is over, SAC Weekly is going to continue going through basketball season because we are going to have college basketball for the sim coming up soon. We're really excited about that. Really hope you guys can check that out. But for now, we still have football going on and a couple good matchups coming up here with Alabama taking on Texas A&M, Georgia and Florida, Ole Miss and Auburn, South Carolina and Missouri, Tennessee and Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Western Kentucky. That's 11 teams fighting this week. 5 SEC matchups with the one out of conference of Vanderbilt taking on Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky, the number 3 team in the nation. Arkansas, Mississippi State, and LSU all on a bye this week. But we do have the world's largest outdoor cocktail party with Georgia and Florida going on, plus the Battle of the Barrel down in Knoxville with Tennessee taking on Kentucky. And we've got 3 teams here in the top 25. It's a step down from where we've been with 5 teams being in the top 25 and 3 of those being in the top 10 at our peak. But we've had some teams with some big disappointments, with LSU dropping a few games, Kentucky not being anywhere near where they were expected to be. So it's not great, but it's okay because the teams that we do have in there are contenders for the playoffs, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But we're going to check in with our first game here with number 13 Alabama taking on Texas A&M, and Alabama's going to take this one 25-6. And Texas A&M has dropped every game since that Arkansas debacle, and it's really confusing on what is going on down there in College Station. They don't know what's going on. Hell, we don't know what's going on. But Alabama continues to roll as they go 19 for 37 on their passing with 51%, 212 yards to the air with 1 touchdown coming from there as well. Their other 2 touchdowns come on the ground on 37 different rushing attempts for 145 yards. So not a great offensive day for them. They get just a bit over 350 yards total. But as long as you're moving the ball and putting the points on the board, that's all you really got to do. I mean, it's as simple as that. Now, Texas A&M hardly ever gets the ball for their point. They only go 3 for 12 on their passing. They target 5 different receivers, and two of their receivers didn't have any catches at all, and each of their other 3 receivers only caught at one time. That's a 25% completion percentage for only 12 yards through the air. 199 yards on the ground. You usually see that flip. You usually see guys throwing it for a ton and not really being able to move it on the ground, but Texas A&M doing the flip here of a day which just complete futility for them. Interesting defensive day as both teams recover a fumble. Alabama does give up a turnover. They don't throw any interceptions. They don't give up any sacks, but they do fumble the ball. But that defense gets behind the line for those 10 tackles for loss, which is a huge day for Alabama. It wasn't a dominating performance by any means, but it was definitely enough to win this game, which at the end of the day is, I mean, that's all you need to do, really. Disappointing kicking day for them. They only make 1 of their 3 extra points. They go 2 for 3 on their field goals, with the longest one coming from 33 yards. Alabama's going to move to 8-3 overall in the season, 5-2 in the SEC, and they're tied for first in the West. And we're going to break that down a little bit later because the West matchup, the West race is really interesting. Texas A&M, on the other hand, like I said, they've lost every game since that Arkansas game. Their SEC season is over. They finished 1-7 with 3-8 overall. They have one more game coming up, but it's not going to affect them at all in the standings. They're not bowl eligible anymore. I mean, their season's over at this point. They're just playing for pride for this last game, trying to squeeze out one more win before the season's over, and hopefully they can do it. Moving on from that one, I'm sure Texas A&M wants us to move on, but let's move on to the cocktail party, the game of the week. It's Georgia taking on Florida, and at one point, these two teams were the worst in the country. They were ranked in that bottom 120, but they have done a lot better. Both teams have really started to figure out who they are, how to use their teams, and they've both been very impressive. In the time since we've done a show, both of them have moved up in the SEC. Both of them have gotten some wins under their belt. Georgia, especially. Georgia finishing their SEC season with this win is going to be third in the SEC East. They're going to finish at 500 in the SEC, at 4-4, and they're going to be 5-5 overall with two more games coming up: Georgia Southern and Georgia Tech. Their SEC season is over. This is where they're at. Their last two games are going to be trying to get that bowl eligibility, and they have a really good chance against Georgia Southern and Georgia Tech, both of whom aren't dominating teams, but they're definitely not ones to overlook either. Getting back to the game, though, Georgia wins it 21-16. They go 21 for 40 on their passing for just over 50% completion, 290 yards through the air, getting 3 touchdowns through the air. They don't get any touchdowns on the ground because they don't need any, but they do move the ball to set up those passing touchdowns with 33 rush attempts, 173 yards. Not a huge defensive day for either team. Georgia gets 2 sacks, doesn't take away any interceptions. They do come up with a fumble recovery. Florida, on the other hand, has 3 interceptions off Georgia, which you would think would be enough to try to set up their offense to do some things. Travion Johnson takes 2 of those picks by himself, but they only get 1 sack on the Georgia quarterback, and it's just not quite enough. They can't get the ball into position. And you can see that difference here where Florida has 28 for 47 on their passing, 59.5% completion rate. They get 266 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air, which is a nice day for them. But on the ground, they cannot get it done. 28 rush attempts for only 68 yards. And that's where we were talking about that flip. They get it moving through the air, but they cannot move the ball effectively on the ground. And unless you can piece those two games together, the passing game and the rushing game, you're not going to win games in the SEC. That's the story we've seen all season. That's the story we're going to see in a couple later games as well. Both teams, an okay kicking day, 3 for 3 for extra points on Georgia. They missed their 1 field goal attempt that luckily they didn't need to win the game. Florida does convert a field goal from 35 yards and they go 1 for 2 on their extra points. So Florida SEC season is going to be done as well. They're going to finish 6th in the East at 3-5, and they are 4-7 overall with 1 more game coming up. Their season is done as well. They don't have anything to play for with bowl eligibility or anything like that, but it is an important game for them to finish the season strong, to continue to understand their team for next year, maybe get some good recruits coming in to set them up for the next couple of years. So Florida's got some promising look for the future. Same with Georgia as well, as both of these teams start to understand not just the game, but their teams as well. Moving on, we've moving back to the West. It's Ole Miss taking on Auburn. And Ole Miss, I dunked on Ole Miss the last time we had a show, and that was to my hubris because they did end up beating Kentucky in that time. Ole Miss doesn't win this game, and Auburn continues what we were suspecting they might do as they power up that Western Conference as they started late. Winning this game is going to move them to 5-2 in the SEC. It does say second in the West. I believe that's probably just because it's going in alphabetical order at this point. They are tied with Alabama for the SEC West first place. 6-4 overall, which is not great. If you're Auburn, you want that 6-4 to be higher, but they do still have a couple games to set them up for an 8-win season if possible. Ole Miss does not have a terrible day, especially for Ole Miss. 17 for 37 on their passing is only 45% completion. It's fine, 144 yards, no touchdowns through the air. They do give up 2 interceptions, and they take 4 sacks, which is probably why they didn't make this game any closer than it was. Because on the ground, they move it fairly effectively. 23 rushing attempts for 104 yards, and that's where their sole touchdown comes from. Uh, on the defensive end, Keenan Johnson takes away 2 Auburn passes for his interceptions, as Ole Miss takes away 3 on the day. They get 2 sacks, 5 tackles for loss. I mean, it's a great defensive day for both of these teams in a low-scoring affair. It just becomes a slugfest. Ole Miss converts 2 of their 3 field goals, one of them being from 42 yards out, which is great. They convert their single extra point. Now Auburn goes 24 for 47 on their passing for 351 yards, which is the big difference there. They get 2 touchdowns, throw 3 interceptions like we talked about, and take 2 sacks. So you want to see that cleaned up a little bit if you're Auburn going into the showdown with Alabama for the Iron Bowl. Hopefully they can do that. Their ground game, non-existent. They basically just ran the ball when they got tired of throwing it a little bit. Only 14 rushing attempts and only 26 yards on those. Those were break plays, you got to feel like. Auburn's defense takes away 2 interceptions. Kyle Smith gets 2 sacks for himself on Auburn's 4 sacks of the day. Kicking was great for them. They do miss an extra point, which you shouldn't be missing extra points if you're a kicker, but it happens. They convert 4 of their field goals, which that's the difference in the points there is those 4 field goals, 12 points, 40 yards. We've talked about it here before. You guys hate when I talk about it, I'm sure. Field goals are so important, and they will win you a football game. So Ole Miss this season is going to be done as well for the SEC play. They're going to finish 3-5 in the SEC for 5th place in the West. 3-8 overall in the season with one more game coming up. Maybe they can move to a 4th game, but if you're Auburn, you've set yourself up for a surprise visit to Atlanta. If you can get past Alabama in 2 weeks, you've set yourself up for great success. Ole Miss they're kind of in the same boat as Florida and Georgia. Not a great season if you want to look on it, but you learn some things, you understand some things, and with one more game coming up, you want to put yourself in a position to impress some recruits and get them on the board. Not going bowling this season, but that doesn't mean your season's over with recruiting season still going on. Moving on, we're going to go back to the East again. South Carolina taking on number 19 Missouri, and this was probably the worst game this week. Missouri clobbers South Carolina 42-13. South Carolina had an odd season. Their SEC season is done as well. They go 4-4 in the SEC, which is good for 4th in the East. They played a lot of spoiler. They beat Kentucky early. Kentucky's only home loss. They beat a couple other teams, but they never quite understood who they were. They still have one more game coming up, and I'm sure that's the Clemson game at the last game of the season, as we do the rivalry week in week 14, I believe it is. But even in this game, you still have a great game. 37 for 49 on passing, 75% completion, and you don't win the game. But this is why. 327 yards to the air, no touchdowns coming to the air. You throw 3 interceptions and take 4 sacks. Yeah, you do plug 8 different receivers, but turning that ball over, huge chunks of yardage loss from sacks. When you're playing a top 25 team like Missouri, that cannot happen. But Missouri's defense is insane. We've seen that all year, and this is kind of an off day for them. They only get 9 tackles for loss, but they trade those off for the sacks and the interceptions, I feel like. On the ground, South Carolina doesn't do too terribly either. 4 different guys, 33 different rush attempts for 158 yards. But if this is the game I'm thinking of, they have 2 guys in negative yardage on their day. Their sole touchdown for the day comes on the ground as well. Defense does pretty good. 5 tackles for loss. They take an interception away from Missouri, and they get to the quarterback twice as well. A great kicking day for them, for both these teams, really. They convert their single extra point, and they go 2 for 3 on field goals, but that one comes from 48 yards out, which is just great. Missouri's solid. They've been solid all year. They go 17 for 33 on their passing for 51.5% completion, 257 yards to the air, 3 touchdowns, give up an interception and take 2 sacks, but whatever. You scored 42 points, 28 different rush attempts for 156 yards, so moving the ball effectively on both ends. Another touchdown coming on the ground as well. We talked about the defense there, and their kicking team could not miss. They don't even attempt a field goal because they don't need it, but they go 6 for 6 on their extra points. So Missouri's SEC season is over as well. They are going to finish second in the East. They drop a game to Tennessee a couple weeks ago while we weren't doing shows, and that pretty much locks up the division for Tennessee. They're going to finish 8-3 overall in the season. I believe the Border War is their last game, playing Kansas there, who Kansas has been playing lights out as well, so that's going to be a great game to watch. But Missouri with a great season. They finished second in the East, like I said. South Carolina, for an AI coach team, that's kind of where you expect to see them, right in the middle, with the chance to go 6-6 and go bowling. Moving on down to Knoxville, it's the battle of the barrel. Tennessee, who's already locked up the division, taking on Kentucky. And Kentucky, you thought this game at the beginning of the season was going to be the game for the division, but Kentucky has had a terrible season. We have not played well at all, but we do throw in a little kink in this game. Michael Oliveros gets swapped to running back instead of quarterback, with Casey Williams coming in for quarterback for this game and does decently. For Kentucky, he goes 25 for 39 in his passing, 64% completion rate, 325 yards, and a touchdown through the air, but he takes 3 sacks, which is probably why you see all this yardage for Kentucky, but that doesn't convert into points because they take 3 sacks. On the ground, they only have 2 rushers. They have Calvin Dupree and Michael Oliveros, but they only rush it 26 times, and between them, they get 118 yards. So still not able to piece the game together on the ground for Kentucky in big games. Calvin Dupree, he had a good game this time, but typically he'll disappear, and that's just the entire rushing game for Kentucky. They just disappear in big games. Now, Kentucky could have made this closer if Terry Socoli had converted some field goals. He goes 1 for 4 on field goals. He makes a 38-yarder and misses 3 chip shots. I believe all of his misses from 30 yards or less. So Kentucky's season is over as well. SEC, they're going to finish 3-5, nowhere near where they expected, 5th in the East. They do have the tiebreaker over Florida with a win there, but they just not great. They're going to finish 5-6 with the Governor's Cup left as well. Week 14, taking on Louisville in Louisville as well. Now, Tennessee, on the other hand, has a great game. I mean, just lights out. 22 for 33 on their passing for 66% completion, 323 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns. They only take 1 sack. Their 2 rushers as well go 31 times, 229 yards. They get 2 more touchdowns on the ground. They get behind the line of scrimmage 7 times, including 3 sacks. And their kicker is perfect all day. 4 for 4 on his extra points, 3 for 3 on his field goals, with the longest coming from 38 yards. And that is the game you want to see from a team like Tennessee, who is a national title contender this year at this point. Their SEC season is not over yet. They are 9-2 overall in the season. I don't know why it says 9-22. They are 9-2 overall with 1 more game coming up. They're going to be bye next week, but they have Vanderbilt left. They've already locked up the SEC East. They're the only lock in the SEC right now. And with Vanderbilt coming up, and Vanderbilt's just not very good, you got to expect that they're going to win that game and win it handily, and Tennessee will be your only double-digit win team for the SEC, probably. And then they'll be heading to it. They've already guaranteed a slot in Atlanta, and they're just waiting to see who they're going to face. So we're going to move down to Nashville. We're going to stay in Tennessee, but we're going to move over to Nashville with our sole out-of-conference game this week, with Vanderbilt taking on number 3 Western Kentucky. And this is what we expect to see in 2 weeks when Tennessee comes to town as well. Vanderbilt gets clobbered 40-9, and it wasn't even that close. Neither one of these teams have a great defensive day, and Western Kentucky, who's a top 5 team in the nation, you'd think would do better against a team like Vanderbilt, but when you have the offense that they did for the day, you don't need it. Western Kentucky, 67.5% completion rate, 27 for 40. They get 340 yards to the air. They throw 4 touchdowns in there. They take a single sack, but they don't give up the ball at all. No interceptions, no fumbles. They hit 7 different guys through the air, 3 different rushers on 34 attempts, 182 yards on the ground, and another touchdown coming there. They do pull 1 interception from Vanderbilt, and they only get 2 tackles for loss, which, again, it's Vanderbilt. You want to get behind them more, but when you score 40 to their 9, what's it matter? 4 for 5 on their extra points and 2 on 2 on their field goals, for the longest coming from 46 yards. Western Kentucky's having a hell of a season. They're 9-1 overall with 2 games left. First in the East for the Conference USA at 6-1. I believe they've probably locked that one up. If they haven't, they should have by now. Just an insane season for Western Kentucky, who you're going to have to watch for them in the playoffs. They are coming, and they're going to be here for the next couple of years as well. Vanderbilt, not a great day. Honestly, fairly similar to Ole Miss's day, but not able to convert that as much. 13 for 29 in their passing for 44.8% completion, 126 yards to the air on 7 different receivers. Their 1 touchdown comes on the ground. They throw an interception. 28 rush attempts are 141 yards, which is fine. That's when you're playing a team like Western Kentucky, that's not a bad day for you on the ground as well. Anyway, kicking team, whatever. They missed their single extra point and their single field goal that they're able to convert or able to attempt. They do convert from 42 yards out, which is great for Vanderbilt. That is a promising view for them to continue on to the future. Now, their SEC season is not quite done. Like we talked about earlier, they still have to take on Tennessee the final week of the season. But they are 2-5. They probably have the 7th position in the East locked up, unless they pull off a miracle win over Tennessee. But I don't believe that they have any tiebreakers, so they are probably going to finish 7th there. 3-7 overall in the season, which is just terrible. I mean, it's the same as Ole Miss, but Vanderbilt at the very beginning of the SEC season, we were talking about being a dark horse. They were pulling off some surprising upsets, but for where they were at one point, that is not where we would have expected them to land, I guess. So that's going to do it for our slate of games this week. Our player of the week this week is going to be from Tennessee's Aldrick Unoa, the running back there, who is the main man for the Tennessee Volunteers this season. There's a lot of talk about Brandon Savage, but Aldrick Unoa has been carrying that team on his back, and you see it in this game. He has 3 catches for only 57 yards in the game against Kentucky, but he does have a receiving touchdown on there. So they are looking for him to set it up. Not just to set it up, but to finish it as well. He goes 29 different rushes for 224 yards. That's 7.72 yards per attempt, which is just a crazy day. He adds 2 rushing touchdowns as well, so 3 total touchdowns on the day, almost 300 yards total. Just an absolute clinic for him. Moving on to check out the standings. Like I said, most of these are final, but we do have the West there. It is a 3-way tie with LSU, Auburn, and Alabama all tied at 5-2. Mississippi State pulling up there in 4th with 4-3 on the season. Ole Miss at 3-5, taking up 5th. Arkansas, who was kind of the same as Vanderbilt. You thought Arkansas might do more this season. They do still have one SEC game coming up, but they won't do much better than they are now. They might swap into 5th place, but I don't think so. And Texas A&M capping off a disappointing season, coming in last place there with only 1 win in the SEC. Over in the East, like we talked about, Tennessee has got the division locked up. Missouri locked into second place as well, 6-1, 6-2. If Tennessee does for some reason lose to Vanderbilt, which is probably not going to happen, but if it does, Tennessee does hold the tiebreaker over Missouri, so they have that division locked up. Georgia coming in at third, which I don't think anybody expected towards the beginning half of the season. 2 games left for them. They could finish 7-5 if things fall the right way, but they're going to finish 4-4 in the East. South Carolina pulling up in fourth at 4-4 as well, and 5-6 overall. Kentucky with fifth. Florida falling the tiebreaker for Kentucky. They're going to be in sixth, and then Vanderbilt also down there in seventh as well. So where does that leave us? I mean, can Tennessee get to those 10 wins? Can they pull off the one last game that they have against Vanderbilt and pull up a double-digit win season? The only one that will be in the SEC. In the West, who's going to take the West? Like I said, we have a 3-way tie, but there is a clear path for everything. At least the SEC is very clear on their tiebreakers. If it's going to come down to Week 14 with Alabama taking on Auburn in the Iron Bowl. If Auburn wins that game, Auburn wins the West because they beat LSU already. So it doesn't matter what happens in the LSU game. If Auburn wins the Iron Bowl, Auburn is going to win the West, and they're going to head over to Atlanta and take on Tennessee. Now, if Alabama wins, but if LSU loses, then it's going to be Alabama going over to Atlanta. Alabama's fate is not completely in their hands. They have to win the game, and they have to hope that LSU loses. I don't remember what game is the last game for LSU, but I don't think it's going to be a gimme. Or I think it is a gimme game. So you've got to pray for some miracle if you're Alabama. Now, if Alabama wins and LSU wins, then LSU is going to win, and they're going to head over to Atlanta because LSU did beat Alabama. So that's the 3 scenarios. Auburn wins, they go on. Doesn't matter. Alabama wins and LSU loses, then it's Alabama. If Alabama wins and LSU wins, then LSU's moving on. So Week 14 is going to be the week to watch here in the SEC to figure out who's going to Atlanta to take on Tennessee. If it's Alabama, Tennessee's already beaten them once pretty handily, but Auburn and LSU for them are unknown quantities, and I don't know who you want to face if you're Tennessee. Looking even just a little bit further beyond that, we do still have some potential sneaks for the playoffs. If Alabama can get into the championship game and they can beat Tennessee, then they're a lock. But then Tennessee, having had the season that they've had, is probably also going to the playoff as an at-large bid. But Missouri's also sitting there as well. They're number 19 in the coaches poll, but they do still have a game with Kansas coming up as well. It's going to take a lot for Missouri to sneak into that top 12 and get an at-large bid, which is their only hope. But it's possible. So you've got 3 teams from the SEC, all of whom are currently in the top 25, to have that potential to sneak into the playoffs. Tennessee is almost a guaranteed lock. They've fallen a bit more than I expected in the college football playoff poll after their loss. But they lost to Florida is who it was. But you've got to think Tennessee's going to make it. Win or lose SEC championships game, I think Tennessee is a lock for the playoffs. Can Alabama sneak in, who's sitting right on the edge? 13 in the coaches poll. I think they might be a little lower in the playoff poll, but if they can continue to move up and advance, then they've got a shot as well. And Missouri also sneaking right there on the edge. Looking at next week, we've got a lot of teams on bye. Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Missouri, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas A&M all on a bye, as the teams who are playing are looking outside the conference for just some final wins, some final cleanups. Georgia taking on Georgia Southern. Vanderbilt's taking on Wake Forest, which is going to be a difficult game for Vanderbilt. LSU taking on Kent State. that's probably a gimme win. I mean, yeah, UTEP taking on Auburn there. Mississippi State taking on Southern Miss, and Arkansas taking on UTSA. So 6 games coming next week, all of them out of conference. It's going to be interesting to see how the SEC in this late season shapes up with the rest of the college football. But it'll be interesting. A nice, easy week in terms of the SEC race before we get to that explosive last week where everything is going to be decided like we talked about. Quick look on recruiting there. We've got quite a few commits. We've had quite a few since we last checked in as well. We get 8 commits here this week. 1 coming to LSU, Patrick Matry, the 3-star wide receiver from Louisiana, going to LSU. Texas A&M picking a local guy from College Station, a 3-star inside linebacker, David Donaldson. UK picking up a recruit as well. That'll be their 3rd recruit on the season, a 3-star outside linebacker from just over in St. Louis, Alfred Cox. That's a decent pickup for them. Florida lands a nice swath of 4 stars, two cornerbacks in Edgar Mendoza and Kevin Moore, and then a 4-star offensive guard, Kelvin Williams. All of them come from Florida, so that's great for Florida cleaning up their home area. And then Tennessee picking up 2 as well, going over to Nashville and picking out of Vanderbilt's backyard for another 4-star cornerback in James Peckham. And then down into Georgia and Warner Robins for a 4-star guard and James Hilton. Still, we see some teams here now really picking up recruits. So we've got a couple in here with 9 recruits now. But Florida and LSU picking up some nice rankings, with Florida in our rankings at number 17 with only 5 recruits. So they're outpacing Oregon and Washington State and TCU and Penn State, all of whom have more recruits than them. Penn State has those 4 of the top 5, and they have 7 recruits on the year, and we've got them ranked down in 24. So that's great news for Florida for the next couple years, with the 3 4-stars that they just picked up, and in addition to the other 2 recruits that they have as well. LSU having a nice year as well. They only have 4, but they're coming in at 22. So they're also outpacing teams like North Carolina and Penn State and Tulane, all of which have more recruits than them. But they are picking up the quality guys. It's not always how many you have. It is also about the quality you have. So that's great to see from these 2 teams. Every team in the SEC by now should have at least 1 commit. I think there might be 1 team that doesn't have any, but you're seeing them pick up the quality guys that you need for the SEC to continue to be competitive for the next couple years. So that is going to do it for us here at the SEC Weekly for Week 12. I appreciate you guys sticking with me. Like I said, I'm sorry for the long layoff, but we are back. We're going to be continuing through the rest of the season, through the playoffs, and through basketball season as well. So I hope to see you all there. Appreciate it. Thanks.